Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Music Effect Design. We are your hosts. I'm Jordan Pittner, a visual designer, drill writer, music educator out of Phoenix, Arizona.
And my name is Mike Kruger. I'm a music educator, composer, and arranger out of Cleveland, Ohio.
And my name is Holly Paxton. I'm a music educator and color guard instructor in Phoenix, Arizona.
And we are excited to have a wonderful guest today. If this is your first time tuning in, this is part of our Stand series. Pretty simply, it's just a platform for people to share their perspectives in the marching arts, and for us to ask some questions and listen. With us today is a wonderful friend, a great performer, instructor, designer, Guillermo. Thanks for coming here. If you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit further, go ahead.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Guillermo. I'm a Bakersfield, California native. My marching history with drum corps, I marched at Blue Devils Drum and Bugle Corps in 2011 and 12. My winter experience started with Santa Clara Vanguard Winter Guard in 2013. I marched there 14 and 16. And then when I moved to Ohio, I also marched at Blue Coats in 2019. And currently I am working with Miamisburg World Guard as a technician, and also at the Blue Coats Drum and Bugle Corps.
And yeah, so you've kind of run the gamut with all of your different experiences. How long have you been in Ohio now?
So I moved here the winter of 2016. So it's about to be what, 4 years in December, I want to say. So
Man,
it's about 4 years in December.
That happened fast.
Yeah, it did.
I remember when you moved, it was like, wow, he's going all the way to Ohio.
Yeah, right.
And now it's just like, I didn't even think to double check that you were on Eastern time when I was like, oh, he said he gets off work at this time. Oh, okay, that's his time, Eastern. I didn't even almost think that you were still in California. Wow.
Yeah.
It's crazy how that happens.
Yeah, it's funny because, not to go off too far on a tangent, but it's funny because right now with everybody being in quarantine, my family likes to meet on Sundays via Zoom or FaceTime. And my family is pretty much spread out throughout South America, Central America, and North America. So I'm in Ohio. My mom and my second eldest sister is in California, and then I have another sister in El Salvador, and then I have another sister in Colombia. So we're in all of us are in completely different time zones. So when we meet, we have to coordinate for all of those time zones. I get it. I totally get it.
That's amazing. It's like the total opposite of my huge family, which is all in one town. It's not even technically a town. It's an unincorporated community. And I'm the one person that doesn't live there. So it's crazy. So you've got a huge range of experiences, Guillermo. How did you get started in the guard dance world?
Well, I actually started fairly young. I was very fortunate that so first of all, I grew up in a very low income, very poor socioeconomical community in Bakersfield, California. It's a very kind of agriculture-based community. We have lots of fields, a lot of migrant workers there. So the majority of the students there were, low income. We had a program there established, a color art program established. And the funny thing about it was, so my mentor, Jesse Apperson, he was actually a member of the Blue Devils Drum and Bugle Corps in 1998 and 9. Great years, by the way.
Yeah.
And he was actually, I was one of his first students. So when he aged out of Blue Devils, I joined his class the year after, the year right after. So I was part of his first class ever as just a student, just a regular student. And at that point, he invited me to be a part of the color guard to come and audition and do something. And, it was funny because you see the flags and the rifles and the saber. And as soon as I saw a rifle, I was like, what is that? And so it was funny ever since that. I mean, the rest is kind of history. But Jesse was the one that got me involved. He said, I really think that you would enjoy it, and I think that you would be really good. Let's talk to your mom and see if you want to do it. And my mom was like, as long as he's home at this time, as long as he's he has transportation, as long as we can work all that out, he can do whatever he wants. And my mom was very supportive of me then, which I'm very grateful for. And so I kind of just continued the program. I marched, in high school as well. I also got to march in independent guard at the same time as I did my high school color guard. The rules were very different at our circuit, so it was allowed for me to be able to like march, Scholastic AA that competed at WGI, and then go march with the independent open group that was also marching. The only thing was, local circuit wise, I was able to do both, but at the WGI level, I had to, choose one or the other. And quite often, my instructors would always say, go with your high school. They were always very, very keen on your high school program is the one that's important.
That's
You'll be
awesome.
okay if you miss a
Wow.
regional, like have your high school experience. And so I did. And I don't have any regrets on that. But Jesse and Jennifer Maury, who was my instructor in high school, they both really pushed me to be better at like everything that there was to do with color guard. So not just saber, not just rifle, not just flag, but also dance, And at that point in my life, I because I grew up in a community that was very poor, college wasn't really an option for me. Like I didn't really think college was an option for me until my junior year. And somebody suggested that I try to go to a dance school. And Jesse and Jennifer were like detrimental in like all the process of like helping me to prepare for all of this. My high school counselor as well. And I applied to go to CSU Long Beach, San Diego, Berkeley, UCLA. And I was, very fortunate that UCLA handed me an offer, and I took it and went to dance school and studied dance at UCLA for 5 years. And it just kind of went from there, and then at that point I did the marching band at UCLA for a little bit. And then I did the winter guard at SCB at the same time. And then afterwards, and then I moved to Ohio. I got the job at FJM, right?
Yeah.
I got the job at FJM, which is where all of us met
Mhm.
in 2016, that summer. So I finished marching SCV. And then right that summer, maybe a month later, I moved to Ohio for the summer and got the job at FJM. And then that led to the offer for Miamisburg. And then from there, I stayed in Ohio. I came back. Scott Winters, I also have to mention in terms of this, because Scott Winters was played a huge role in me becoming a part of the world-class teaching group. He got me into teaching at Miamisburg. He was so kind and so encouraging, and I learned so much from him in terms of how to work with teenage girls, and he really expressed to me kind of the power of like being an instructor to young women, and how we have to be an example, and how we have to, in some ways, almost be kind of like a father figure to them too, encouraging them, pushing them, but also being kind and thoughtful and informative. So Scott was also a huge part of me kind of getting to where I am now. And yeah, and then from there, I marched Bluecoats in 19, as I was also still teaching Miamisburg. And after I marched at Bluecoats that following summer, Kuz, who is the caption head at Bluecoats for Color Guard, sent me, a message, and Jenna Foe, who was one of our instructors, was like, she recommended me to Kuz, and it was a nice kind of reach out of people who supported me and saw my abilities in being able to teach and pick up choreography and do all these things. And I've just been very fortunate to have the opportunity to kind of prove that.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
You've had such a like wide like a wide range of experiences from like tiny beginning guard, not well maybe not tiny, but like, you know, small town experience, and like you've just been everywhere. Like got marched some of the big names, working with some of the big names, and traveling all over. It's cool that you have such a wide variety and all the things that you've done.
Yeah, I'm very, I feel very fortunate because I think like a lot of, I kind of believe in this kind of, I kind of believe in a little bit of the law of attraction where it's like, you know, the
Right.
things that you want in life will come to you or will present themselves as an opportunity, you know, and for me as an instructor, at least from an instructor perspective, I've really have tried to reach out to people and be like, you know, I'm here if you need help with a program, or like I make myself accessible to people because I know that for me it's going to be a learning experience, but also I love what I do. I enjoy what I do. I feel like I'm good at what I do, and when you have kind of that combination of things, you're so willing to take on these opportunities and um, be able to kind of share your experiences with a different group of people. And that's why I like to work with different types of groups of independent groups and scholastic groups, because I feel like because I have that wide lens of experience, I'm hoping that something that I've experienced will resonate with any of the groups that I work with to help them grow as a program in whatever way, whether it be, you know, helping them with technique, or whether it be, you know, bulking up their vocabulary, you know, or even just talking about general effect and design of a show, you know, and how it makes me feel, and how to work together, like collaboratively in a process. And I think that's, I try to take those experiences that I've had, that I've been very fortunate enough to have, and kind of share that with other people who may not have the accessibility to that.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it's all about is is sharing your experience. I think, you know, I've seen you in person do that do that with people. So it's really cool to hear you say that. I'm going to ask you. I'm guessing this might be a difficult question. It's okay if there's not a clear answer, but I'm curious. Uh, like of all the different groups you've been a part of, either as a marching member or an instructor, um, which group or groups have made you feel the most like at home, that have made you, does that make sense when I ask in that kind of way?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I will say that my experiences have been different at each organization that I've been a part of as an instructor and as a participant.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I think for me, what has really stood out to me is my interactions with not just the students or my cast members, but also my relationship to my instructors, what has always
Yeah.
played a big role in my experience. And for me, I can't say that it's a place, I can say that it's people.
Mm.
And the first place I really felt like the most comfortable, just being me and expressing myself and being confident, I would say would have to be first was at Santa Clara Vanguard Winter Guard.
Mhm.
Um, and then once I started marching Blue Coats, definitely Blue Coats. And um, I have so many things that I can't really express without like getting emotional sometimes about
Right.
those instructors,
Yeah.
because
Right.
so I kind of mentioned in my bio that I marched in 2013, 2014, and 16. There was a gap in between, and 15, which was the year that I didn't march and they won. But it was a necessary break for me at that point in time. You know, at that point in my life, my grandfather, who was kind of like my father figure, he was
Mhm.
literally my dad. And I grew up with him, like living with me in my home. He had passed away the month before auditions,
Mhm.
15. And so it was a really hard time for me. And I auditioned, I made the team, And I even started the process, and I felt like I wasn't really connected or really all there for my team, for myself, um, for the art that they were making. And so I kind of quit,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I had a long conversation with a lot of them, and, you know, kind of explained their reason, you know, my reasons to them. And I said, you know, this has been kind of a really emotionally impactful point in my life, and I don't feel stable enough to be a part of the group. You know, I don't want to do that to you. I don't want to do that to myself, to feel that extra pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to have the best performers to put out this piece. And I don't think I'm one of them at this point in time because of where I am mentally. And let me just tell you that Carol and Jim and John Vanderkoff, they all reached out to me after I had already talked to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were reaching out to me and saying, is there anything that we can do to make you feel comfortable? Is there something that we can do to make you feel good about, you know, coming in and still participating with us? You know, we love you, and this can be a great way to kind of express that pain, but we also understand if that's not something you want to do at the time. But just know that you have a support system here. And like Carol, man, I can't tell you how wonderful of a presence she is. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, she's kooky, and she is so kooky, and I love that about her. But on a human level, like on a deep level, on an emotionally intelligent level, she really reached out to me, and to me that stuck with me. And so when they made the transition to kind of working with Blue Coats, you know, to me it was a no-brainer.
Right.
I didn't really audition anywhere else. I almost considered it, but not really. I said, this is the group of people that I want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, John Vanderkoff, Jim Moore, Greg Lagola, Carol, Kathy, like the usual crew. I always say the usual suspects, right? I always love working with them because they make their kids, their students, feel appreciated and seen and heard and supported. And that's influenced me as an instructor. I can definitely say that that it's influenced me. And because of that, I think like it's that group of people. So right now it's Blue Coats. I can say with certainty that I think that Blue Coats has really been a place that I can call home, both as a participant but also as a staff member. You know, and if you follow them on social media, if you follow Blue Coats on any social media, you'll see how, you know, especially during this time, they've been so vocal and so supportive of all of our students.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Mike Scott and Genevieve, like they have been so instrumental in making sure that our organization as the Blue Coats is thriving, but also being proactive in a lot of the systematic changes that we want to see done within not just our organization, but also, you know, in terms of like DCI. You know, they're leaders in DCI. I mean, Genevieve is like all in with this like women in music, you know, the program that they started off with DCI, the women in DCI. I mean, Genevieve is you know, she's part of our Blue Coats family, you know. Mike Scott is like also just incredible. He reaches out to the students. Can I tell you, during this like coronavirus time where all of us are in quarantine, let me tell you that Mike Scott has taken it upon himself amidst having to figure out fundraisers, amidst having to create programming for students, even during this time, involved in several projects, not just, you know, helping to create the advisory board with, you know, the African-American and Black staff members that we have, Brian and Rick. He has so much going on. And can I just tell you that amidst all of that, he finds the time to set up mindful meditation practices with all the Blue Coats drum corps. He sets up a Zoom meeting, and he has a mindful meditation session with the
Mhm.
students, and he leaves it open-ended to students, staff, anybody. And he does
Very
this
cool.
out of his own time. And to me, that says a lot.
Right.
You know, to me
Yeah.
as a staff member, I mean, that
Yeah.
says to me, wow, this is a leader who's fully invested in the well-being of his students. You know,
Yeah.
I could say the same about
Yeah.
pretty much every single staff member at Blue Coats.
Right.
And to me, that's what's been kind of a very key thing for me. It's the people. It's really not just the place, it's the
Mhm.
people. You know?
Yeah, that's not surprising for me to hear. I remember when I guess it was right after the first protests in Minneapolis. You know, a lot of companies and organizations were starting to step out, and I remember thinking as I was doing the endless Facebook scroll, I remember thinking, I bet the Bluecoats are going to be one of the first to like step up to the plate. I remember having that thought as I was scrolling. I thought the drum corps are going to do it, and I think the Bluecoats will be right up there at the front. So that's
And
cool to
here's the
hear.
thing.
Side.
Yeah, and like here's the thing. It's not just about words with them.
Right, right.
To
Mhm.
them, it's not just words. To them, it's
Right.
how can we make this into tangible action?
Yeah.
You know, and when we're talking about, especially in this point in time where there's so much going on, it's like, what tangible differences can we really make?
Mm-hmm.
Look to the Bluecoats. Look to
Yeah.
organizations like the Bluecoats. You know,
Right.
I'm not saying it's just the Bluecoats doing
Right.
this, but I can say that where I'm at right now, the Bluecoats is home and is doing the right thing. They're being advocates for their students. They're being advocates for the people that are helping them create art, but also just on a human level. You know, I mean, we said Happy Pride, right? And then during that, they posted a whole thing with LGBT members of our drum corps or different members of our drum corps, and they put Happy Pride from the Blue Coats organization.
That's
That's
awesome.
incredible. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
While a lot of people or a lot of groups might be like, we don't want to say anything about anybody, just to play it safe, just to, keep ourselves
Not rock the alumni boat.
Yeah, just to be
Right.
politically neutral.
Right.
But
Right.
it's like, I don't think any of that is political. I think it's appreciating the people around you. It doesn't have to be political.
Right.
On a smaller scale, what are things, because I feel like you seem to have had so many positive experiences with like these amazing instructors. What are some things that like other people can do to help make an environment feel as good as they did? Because there's, for all the amazing instructors that you've had, there's plenty of people out there that have not been able to have that. So like, what are things that instructors can do to build a better community?
Yeah. When I was first asked about doing this podcast, it was a weird, it was like a weird feeling at first, just because like, I'm trying to be very conscious of the fact that I'm very privileged in the sense that like my experiences in drum corps, and well, I will say the majority of them were pretty incredible, and in WGI, all of my experiences, at least from a personal level, were always amazing. Were always incredible. And so I want to be conscious of the fact that while I've had a very privileged and notably privileged experience, I also know that there are these instances, like we're hearing a lot of things coming out from different organizations about, people going through, there's some really like traumatic experiences, which is really unfortunate, especially in our community, which, strives to be inclusive, which strives to be loving and accepting of everybody, especially because we have such a diverse group of people that's, that are in the activity, maybe not so much within groups, but like, as individuals, we do come up from diverse backgrounds. I think part of the main thing that I think a lot of instructors can do, or I think more organizations can do, is really think about the culture that they're developing in their programs. I mean, to me, that's a huge thing. You want to talk about recruitment, you want to talk about support, you want to talk about great performances and performers. you want to talk about people who want to come back to your organization time after time,
Mhm.
then you need to talk about the culture that you're presenting in your organization. You know, if your culture is fear-based, you're not going to have performers coming back, or you're not going to have performers that are as enthusiastic about what you're presenting.
Mhm.
You know, as an artist, I mean, for myself personally, as a choreographer, as an artist, as a technician, I want my students to be excited to be able to learn something. I want them to be intrigued, and I want them to want to break down everything and to learn from me. I don't want them to be afraid of me. I don't want them to feel like they can't make a mistake, or that they can't mess up, because that's not what any of this is about. And I feel like quite often when I hear about these like pretty awful experiences that people are having, a lot of it is based off of bad culture, you know, or lack thereof, good culture.
Mhm.
You know, what are some things that we can think about? Well, sure. I mean, there is an aspect of color guard that is about the discipline that is, it's innately ingrained, you know, in our art form. I mean, let's be serious. Let's take a look at the history of our form. I mean, WGI came out of DCI. DCI came out of military practices. You
Mhm.
know, the way old school drum corps was taught was more involved in militaristic practices, um, you know, and that's their educational style, you know. But now that our form has evolved to be so much different than what it was back then, you know, a lot of things have to change. Your approach to teaching, your approach to design, your approach to vocabulary, your approach to, you know, props or no props, visuals, you know, so many things change, you know, but it seems as though the aspect of culture is the one that we're really struggling with. You know, I think as a community at large, I can't really say that about everybody. Obviously, it's not a blanket statement to say everybody, but I think the ones that are having difficulty or problems within the organization, it's because of the lack of culture. You know, saying my purpose as an instructor or as an organization is to provide the highest level of educational experience for my students, right? Think about how much money students pay to be a part of these organizations.
Right.
Thousands of dollars, thousands of dollars. If you march more than 1 year, you're going to pay over $2,000. Some
Mhm.
people pay over $4,000, you know, and that's just one season, you know. So there's this not disparity. I mean, there are disparities, but there's this kind of disconnect with some people where it's like, you know, I'm getting paid to teach you my way, and my way is the only way. But it's kind of like, you know, that's not the approach. We want to bring an environment in which you have a style that you want to teach your students. Um, make that digestible. How are you going to apply your teaching methods to best serve your kids? You know, and I can say with all honesty, I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm telling you once again, Blue Coats is just like, I love Blue Coats because everything that we do is so student centric. It's so based on how can we provide more for the kids? Like what can we really get in here that will allow the students to flourish, to feel good about what they're doing, and to best prepare them for the task at hand, whether it be rehearsal, whether it be performance, whether it be logistics, you know, a word that they often, or a phrase that they often used to say, you know, and to me at least, both at SCV and at Blue Coats is, you need to be professional, not just on the floor, but also in what you do off the floor. You know, working as a team to clean up the space that you rehearsed in, making sure that everybody is accounted for, make sure that you don't forget things. Like, you have to be professional in every sense. You have to strive
Yeah.
to be the best, even at the little things, you know? And I think to me, building that sense of culture within your kids is a great way to provide, you know, a positive experience for your students. You know, it also makes it comfortable for students to be able to talk to you. You know, it's
Mhm.
it's it's building a level of rapport with your students that is both respectful but honest. respectful and honest, I should say. And sometimes it's kind of like when everything is just so fear-based,
Mm-hmm.
it just becomes a blurry mess, and people become such an anxious ball of anxiety, and that does nothing for anybody, especially the students. Um, for me, when I've had bad experiences, or if like when I've had bad experiences, I will say that the bad experiences that I've had never had to do with the culture of the organization, so to
Hmm.
say. It was more so the culture and dynamic between performers.
Right.
Which quite often, I think instructors, depending on who you are, I mean, sometimes we're not fully aware of those dynamics,
Yeah.
and you have to be, because that's how you start to kind of create a structure around the kind of culture you want to build. You have to verbalize those things. You have to be the example for those students, because when they leave your organization, and if they are fortunate enough or have the willingness to want to continue to be an instructor or an educator in this activity, you want to have the idea that you did your best to educate them and to be the best educator, so that they can do that with other kids, so that that you taught an individual that's going to bring positive change into the organizations that they go to, or that they teach, or that they oversee or teach at. Um, that's how I feel, in terms of like my experiences. Because my experiences were so positive, and because my experiences were so great, in its vast majority, I use those positive experiences and say, how did that make me feel? Okay, I should strive to make those kinds of same feelings for my students. You know, so culture for me is a big thing. I mean, clearly, I have a lot to say about that. But I think it really starts with culture, not just from an organizational standpoint, but also from student to student, like peer to peer culture. No bullying, like not
Yeah.
allowing that to be a thing. Racism, not allowing that to be a thing. Not even
Mhm.
allow that to be an option for people.
Right.
To stand firm in your belief that we're doing this together. It's part of why I love color guard, is because regardless of where you come from, especially in independent groups, it doesn't matter, what your cultural background is, or, what your socioeconomical status is, you're all in this together,
Mhm.
you know. Now, we can talk about the darker side of things, where it's like, well, opportunities aren't always given to everybody in an equitable proportion.
Right.
And I think for me too, that's kind of part of it. I think the socioeconomical and the disparities between communities of color who really are not, for the most part, do not have uh, as stable of a socioeconomical status as perhaps their white counterparts. Um, and that kind of makes a huge disparity in the representation. You know, and like I say this, but my experience, I will say, like at Blue Devils, I mean, somebody I think once mentioned to me, or like, oh, it's all the Latino boys in at Blue Devils, or all the Filipinos in Blue Devils. One time somebody said that to me, not really thinking about, well, one, the you know m- microaggressions that happen when just mentioning that,
Right.
but also just the fact that, well, yeah, in some ways, the what they were trying to say was that the majority of us are people of color, especially in the color guard. When I was there, at
Right.
least, the majority of us were people of color. We had a lot of kids that were coming from James Logan High School, which the majority of the kids at James Logan High School were of Asian descent, or of Asian cultural background. And California is kind of a huge, community of Latinos. So just by sheer numbers and by, representation, I mean, we're bound to be there. But when you look at other places, is it the same? Is the diversity the same? why and why not? And I think those are conversations to really be had between organizations and between different people.
It really makes me think of, I mean, at least in the scholastic arena, schools, like a school's program, their funding comes from the school's funding, which is based on the housing in the area, which is like the source of all educational inequality in the first place. But it certainly feeds over into the fine arts. I mean, just think of like the families in a low socioeconomic area, like they aren't going to be able to donate as much money or pay larger fees for a band. Like I'm extremely aware because like I grew up in like a poorer area in Tucson, like, and my school was never high budget, but the school I work at now is extremely different. It's like a very, very affluent area relative to a lot of other parts of, even the elementary school where I work is very different than the high school I teach at. And, it definitely makes a difference in how much money a program has, like to buy a floor, to buy new equipment, to pay for instructors. Like instructor pay in Arizona is abysmal at best.
I mean, the West Coast in general, I'll be honest.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like sometimes I hear what other people are getting paid, and it's like, oh, I mean, it's other states, not anyone near me, but like, it really does come down to like, it comes down to money a lot of times. And,
Yeah.
It's important for people to be aware when they're donating money or trying to find ways to make things equitable. A lot of it comes down to, are you putting funding into the school that already has money, or are you trying to do more stuff with the school that doesn't have as much?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a very fair and valid point, and when I was in college, I took this like civic engagement class that was part of like an arts, like the performing arts school, but it was about civic engagement and how to work with different groups of people. And so part of my research was really about like having to figure out like what are some key elements to creating like a successful program, for example. And there was all these things, I had to work with different groups, and it was based off of like a dance thing versus like a color guard. I used dance as my medium as opposed to color guard when I was doing this project. And so what I noticed, and I think that this could be easily applicable to color guard as well, is the fact that one, there's a couple of things that you're going to need. One is going to be parental support. Okay, parental support is a huge part of making an organization run, especially if it's a scholastic group. You need to have supportive parents who are, willing to do kind of some of the work, because it takes a village to be able to put on these programs. I mean, I can say that I'm very fortunate that Miamisburg's mothers, holy moly, part of the reason why we're so successful is because those women are out there just fundraising their tails off. I mean, all of the parents really, but the guard moms in particular that work for us. I mean, they are, making sure that all the snacks are ready, and they have their carts, and they make sure that they have everything so that in and out of performance, the girls have their shoes after the performance or put them away before the performance. They carry all the equipment. I mean, they really are engaged with the girls.
Yeah.
The other thing would have to be administrative support. Administrative support is a huge part of making sure that a program is successful. If you don't have administrative support, you will have less likely, you're less likely to have resources, to your advantage, or at least be able to even have access to resources. Resources such as a gym, like the basic thing you need to be able to provide your students like a good experience. Like a gym is so hard, to be able to come by because there is so much happening,
Right.
And sometimes that just has to do with scheduling, basketball versus whatever else is going on, volleyball and all this stuff, sometimes it has to do with that, which I completely understand. but quite often I feel like that most schools or most organizations don't get that. There are some schools, like for example in Texas, where the color guard has like their own gym, and I'm like, wow, like
Yeah.
that's nice, like that's great, that the school has enough funding to be able to do that. Texas funds their schools in a very particular way that allows them to have that kind of accessibility of resources to them. Not all, but most. But even like here at Miamisburg, we have our own kind of traditional gym that we use, and it's like an elementary school gym that also gets converted into a theater that has like these like lights that are super low. So when you're like trying to tell your students to like toss a 7, they have to go right in between the light and right in between the beam to be able to toss straight up and down,
It's like,
Right. And very rarely do we get to use like a huge gym. But I'm really grateful that we have a space,
Right.
any space. Like some people just don't even have proper access to a proper space.
Right.
So administrative support is a huge deal. And then the second part of it, which I think involves both the parental aspect and the administrative aspect, is financial. Financial support for your organization. And both parents and administration, from a scholastic level at least, they have to work together. They have to work together to say, like, what are you able to provide our group? How can we help to aid you in being able to develop the rest of the money, or to be able to give you more funds, or to make up the funds that the school can't have? Like that clear communication between like a parent booster to an administration, or even a parent booster to like, the color guard instructor. I mean, the color guard instructor sometimes, or quite often, has to be the liaison between the administration and the parent boosters,
Yeah.
And I think to myself, wouldn't it be nice if we could just all talk together and just like kind of work this out together, so that we don't have to go through different channels of communication? But it doesn't quite often happen that way. Sometimes it has to be like the instructor's the liaison. But I think with that, like kind of with that holy trinity of things, financial support, parental support, administrative support, you're setting your organization up for a successful, less stressful season, but it does take work, and people have to be willing to do that work.
Yeah.
You've talked about several of your like great experiences and opportunities you've had so far within the arts, which is great. But we also know that the marching arts has room to grow in general, and that's come more light over the past couple of years, which is great. I think that's a great thing. Have you ever encountered anything personally, or ever witnessed anything with any of your friends or anyone you've marched with? Like, on the flip side of that, has there ever been anything negative you've experienced in the arts that you've gone, wow, we should learn from this moment, or something like along those lines?
It's funny because I don't think I want to say this with caution, because I think that there is a difference, but it doesn't mean that it's correct. But there are some people who experience like racist microaggressions that really the intent isn't to be racist or hateful towards people, but it is hurtful and still not right. And then there's obviously blatant racism, where people are just like blatantly trying to make you feel bad. I think a lot of what I've experienced is mostly like micro aggressions in terms of that. I mean, something that Holly, that I was telling Holly that I was looking forward to talking about, was the fact that I actually changed my name when I was marching. So my name is Guillermo, and it's funny because it first started off in college, where like in college, you'd think that in a place like California, especially like UCLA, for example, would have a vastly like diverse group of people who have had different experiences, but that assumption is like not great, because even those who have had diversity in their life sometimes have ways of like creating these microaggressions without meaning to. So for a long time, people couldn't pronounce my name, or were like making nicknames up for me that were not something that like I in particular was
Like
like, yeah,
asked
you can call me
for,
that.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or like, somebody or nobody has ever asked me like, oh, is it okay if I call you this? Like nobody has, there's not really people that do that. And so quite often when I was introducing myself in college, I was like, I'm junior, I'm junior, I'm junior. And part of that was also me trying to blend into to my
Yeah.
environment, to this really kind of I hate to say this, but it's true, this kind of elitist
Hmm.
culture that kind of existed around me. UCLA is pretty diverse socioeconomically as well, but I will say that the majority of the students that I interacted with, at least, came from a very wealthy background. And so, I think that kind of changes your perspective.
Yeah.
The amount of influence or the amount of power that you hold, whether it be through socioeconomical status or whether it be through racial bias or whether it be from just anything else that could be considered a privileged token there.
Hmm.
It's hard for sometimes people to understand, and I think that's what's kind of happening now, is that like people don't have this perspective because they quite often don't experience these things. And it really comes down to that question where it's like, just because you're not experiencing, does that make it any less real for somebody else who is experiencing?
Hmm.
Our reality is shaped through our perception. It's based off of our perception. How do we gain our perception? Well, it's through our senses, through the things that we experience, through the things that we see, through the things that we hear or are said to us, through what we choose to consume or what we choose to have in our bodies. Um, there's a lot that comes with that perspective, and some people really haven't had to know what it feels like to have to kind of rearrange your life in weird ways to fit in,
Yeah.
to the status quo. So quite often I had to change my name and be like, I'm junior, I'm junior, I'm junior, I'm junior. And that really happened pretty much through all of college. I
Hmm.
was part of an LGBT fraternity in my college, Delta Lambda Phi. And when I was part of my Gamma chapter at UCLA, I'm very grateful for those group of men, of those gay men, because it was a fraternity for gay men, and my queer brothers really helped me to grow as a person, and to say to me like, you shouldn't have to change your name for anybody. You shouldn't have to be apologetic about coming from this background. Like, it's what makes you you. It's what makes you special. It's what makes you unique. Use that to your advantage. Don't think of it as a weakness. you know and my brothers, I mean, I'm telling you, those brothers really helped me through that. And a lot of that kind of transpired then to my color guard life, because then when I left LA, you know and I was away from all my brothers and my friends and the people that I had made genuine connections with, um, when I came to Ohio, at first I started doing the same thing. I found myself doing the same thing where I was introducing
Huh.
myself as junior, at first. And then I don't really know when it clicked, to be quite honest, but I just remember that, Ohio for me was like, this is going to be a fresh new start for me. This is a whole new start for me, my life, my career, the things that I want to do. I get to be the boss of my own life. I get to decide what I want to do, what I don't want to do, who I want to surround myself with, who I don't. And at that point, I feel like I made the decision. My name is Guillermo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I want to be. That's who I am. That's how I want to be known, because being Guillermo is fine. So is Junior, but you know what? Guillermo has a ring to it. Guillermo has a ring to it. It's special.
Right.
Yeah.
So
It's what you
I have a
want.
lot of pride for my name.
You
What was
know,
that?
it's what you want. So
Yeah.
it should be respected. I mean, to me, I don't think that those things need. I don't think a lot of times. I think that's what is sad. I think is that, like, I feel like folks who have feelings or thoughts towards, like, I want to be called this. The fact that they even feel like you have to feel like you have to have a rationale for that, to me, is kind of insane. You know what I mean? Because, like, no, I don't
Right.
have to have a rationale for people calling me Mike or Michael. That's it. I don't have to go around thinking that. So even just the fact that you can't just, that's just simply, that's who you are, right? That's what you want to be known as. Simple as people should be able to respect that. And I think, hopefully people do.
I remember one of the times, so like when we all worked together at FJM, we would always come out to NAU, which is Northern Arizona University. And like, I'm from Arizona. I'm an Arizona native, and like, I don't know, Spanish sounding names have never been like weird for me. But because I was coming from this company from Ohio, it became much more clear to me, because I honestly think that camp that we have is one of the most diverse camps that we usually get, because we have so many people from Arizona, from like the Las Vegas area. And I would notice when some kids with, very normal, like traditionally Spanish names would like give themselves a nickname, but like not with their friends, just to like
make it easy.
I'm hella white. Like I'm so white. And because they don't know anything about, like, they don't know that I know Spanish or Spanish names, but they just, go for the safe version.
Is
because
there like,
they're surrounded by white people.
Sorry, Holly, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, go for it.
Is there a good way to approach that with somebody? Like, you say, my name is Junior. I don't know. Is there like a good way to encourage people, like, what you want to be called is what you want to be called?
Yeah, I mean that I think that's an important thing to talk about, because I think quite often, especially people of color who have more of an ethnic name,
Right.
name.
Mm-hmm.
When they do have an ethnic name, they tend to have this insecurity that
Right.
it's like, oh God, they're going to see me different because I have this kind of long, super long name and this and that. It's funny because talking about my name too, people always assume I have like 5 different names. They're like, oh, you don't have a middle name? Nope, I'm just Guillermo Cisneros, that's it. My suffix is Junior, but that's because I was named after my dad. But nope, I don't have a middle name. And they're surprised that I don't have like 2 last names, a first name, a middle name, and a suffix. Like it's like it becomes like a weird surprise, and it's like, that's just a stereotype,
Right.
And I think it really is kind of a lot of us in the activity are very aware of that. We're aware of the implications of, like, if we have a name that people are going to struggle with, then we need to come up with a way to make it easy, because I don't want to call any attention to myself for those reasons. If I'm going to call attention to myself, it better be for good reasons.
Yeah,
I got you.
So a lot of people, a lot of kids who are performing that have this experience tend to kind of close off saying like their name correctly, or even pronouncing it correct. Like I say Guillermo, but the pronunciation of my name is Guillermo. The double L's are kind of a Y sound, Guillermo, right? But that's hard for some people to say, which I get. But whenever I say my name now, I normally say Guillermo.
I see.
I got you.
To get to the pronunciation, to be able to,
I got you.
to get people to say my name, in some facet or in some way, because it's for some people, I can understand that, like, rolling your R's is hard. Like the double L sound can sometimes be weird. The GUI sound, like that's hard for some people from a linguistical perspective. Like that can be difficult. So I still find ways to say, okay, I can see how this can be hard for people, but you're going to learn how to say it.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes down to, like, I mean, one of those kids from NAU, it was really cool because I taught him at camp, but then like the next year, a year later, he was a fellow student of mine at the University of Arizona. And it was so crazy because I thought that, that was the way he said his name. And then as soon as he was in another space, he pronounced it, completely differently. I mean, with, correct Spanish pronunciation of his name. But, he just insisted that it was the one name, the one way. But pronunciation is like, we've learned how to say Dostoevsky and like Tchaikovsky, and those are spelled real weird. Well,
Yeah.
people have decided, like, learned it,
Right.
but it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and then people dig their heels in not being able to say Guillermo correctly. Like, it's, it's one of those things. It's people act like it's a choice, but then they show other versions where they did learn how to say those crazy Russian names of famous
Yeah.
composers, and it's just it's another way to look at it. It's like, if you care, you're gonna continually try to do it the correct way.
Yeah, and I
Mm-hmm.
think there's also a piece of that though when it comes to names like Russian names, for example.
Mhm.
When we talk about this aspect of like racism within the community, I mean,
Mhm.
Russian names are considered to be white names,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to a name that is Indian or Middle Eastern
Sure.
or Latino,
Mhm.
somehow it becomes this like, oh, I can't do that.
Like an
I can't do that. Like,
inconvenience.
I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a weird inconvenience to them. And it's
That's
like, well,
fascinating.
there's also like other types of like, um, you know, uh, other European style names that are not quite common in like, American English. But it's part of this idea, like racism is so embedded in our culture to the point where like, when we like, you see these videos of people going like, we're in America, we need to speak English in America.
Right.
And it's like, well, that also feeds to the idea of white superiority, that English is the language of, it's the universal language of everything. I think it
Mm-hmm.
may be one of the most commonly spoken languages, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that it is superior to everything else.
Right.
I think it's just a way of communication. It's the same thing that I tell my Spanish speaking or my non-Spanish speaking people of color. Quite often in the Latino culture, and I can say this from experience. We're quite often being told like, oh, you don't know Spanish? Wow, what a disappointment. That you don't know Spanish and you're Latino. And in the back of my head, I'm kind of like, Spanish is also a colonized language, or is a colonizing language.
Mhm.
Spanish was not the Spanish of the indigenous people of El Salvador
Right.
or Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, those are things that people don't really take into consideration. That sometimes, the way that we approach language is also kind of really important because that affects the way that we call what we call people or how we decide to identify people. And quite often when we think about English, we think of English being a standard language, a standard of communication, especially in this country, because it is the language that is spoken the most. And that's fair. Um, but even Spanish, Spanish is also a language that was used to colonize, the indigenous people of Mexico, and in other places of, South America and Central America. I mean, we have Portuguese being spoken in Brazil,
Right.
in South America. Those are all
Right.
languages that came from people who colonized those countries, and colonized indigenous people. So to me, language is just like, it's just a method. It's just it's just another way of communicating with people. And for some people, especially like, for example, like the native parts of our culture, we hold those to be true and dear to us because there is such a racist kind of systemic problem where like we're being told that our language needs to stop, and that's that's an erasing of my culture. That's an erasing of some people's identity in some way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think that there has to be this conversation to say like English is its own language, and we use that to communicate with people who also speak English, much like I use Spanish to communicate with people who also speak Spanish. And there might be some, deeper cultural contexts that may occur during your conversation in Spanish or in English. But it doesn't mean that one is superior to the other. It just means that you know how to communicate in different ways,
Mhm.
you know? If anything, that should be a skill that is appreciated by many. I mean, in Europe and in other countries, like we used to have a foreign exchange student that stayed with us when I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and she knew like 4 different languages. And that's standard. That is standard
Remarkable.
in places like Kazakhstan, you know, where they have to learn like Russian and Kazakh, and then, you know, any countries that neighbor them, like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, like all of the former Soviet Union countries, like they all almost kind of have to learn each other's languages, because after, you know, the separation of the Soviet Union, like they had to create their own communities and their own countries, and a lot of it is you know, derived from Slavic languages, but it's still kind of the same concept when it comes to like, how do you identify people? Jordan, I don't think I ever answered your question, but I think to be honest, I think like the best way to do it is just to ask. You know, I think a lot of people underestimate the simplicity of you know, oh hey, what's your name? What, you know, is that what you like to be called? Like, even when people tell me like, is that your name? Like when they say, oh, my name is Molly, and I say, is that what you go by? Like, is that what you'd like to go by? Then they'll either say yes, or they say, oh, you can call me, you know, Mel or something, like whatever nickname they have or that they want to be called.
Right.
So I make it a point when I meet new students that I not only ask their name, but I say, is that what you like to be called? You know, because that's important, especially when it comes to people who are maybe non-binary or trans, you know, who may not identify with he, him, her, she. They might identify as they or them, you know, in some non-binary term. So it's good to say, what's your name? Because like, especially high school students, like, you know, it's very hard. You have to keep this kind of strange distance where you can't really impose your beliefs onto people, and you shouldn't. But you also want to be respectful of your students' identification, you know, and how they identify as a person. So I always like to be like, what is your name? And sometimes that name is not the name that they prefer to be called. So I say, okay, so then how would you like to be, or like, you know, is that what you're called? Or is that what you're, you know, is that what you like to be called? And then they'll clarify for me. And then that's what I take. I only say what my students feel comfortable with, because they deserve that respect from me as an instructor.
Yeah, it really does make a big difference, like just providing a comfortable place for them to feel okay enough to share. Like I think if I've had non-binary students and trans students, and just making a place comfortable enough that you're able to ask, like, what are your pronouns? Like, what do you go by? Especially in like different settings, if they're not the ones that do their paperwork, they're, you know, onboarding paperwork for whatever they're doing, and maybe their name might not be what's on their paperwork or what their parents call them. Because high school's a nightmare. Like, you're, you know, learning everything about yourself and like finally becoming confident enough to like be yourself, but sometimes you're still stuck in your family's house, and that's not always the comfortable place. So being able to make a comfortable, safe space, you know, going back to what Guillermo was saying about the environment you create and the culture you create, and making a space where kids even feel okay to say like, oh, I don't want to be called that, or like, you know, I want to be called this now, or I'm, you know, just making a space comfortable enough that they can share about themselves in a way that, you know, makes them feel like themselves. So yeah,
it's great.
I was thinking about, I'm getting some feedback here, I'm not sure. If you probably heard like characters, what you do when no one's looking type of deal. That's, you know, who you are is like what you do when no one's looking is who you really are. I kind of feel that way about culture and institutions. Like culture is what an institution does when no one knows.
Right.
And like what you're saying, like what Holly was just saying, that ties back in to Guillermo, like what you were saying with like um, the idea of just a good culture for students to learn in. And I think that goes into like transparency a lot. Like, you know, it's every aspect of what you do. Like, would you be ashamed of talking about what our institution does or organization does, or are you
Right.
proud of it? And if you can ever like pinpoint, well, this is our staff, but you don't feel proud of that, then there's probably a problem. And if you can't talk about your decisions for why that you can't get a gym, then there's probably a problem. And if you can't, you know, the stuff like that, like I really think strongly that the institution and transparency is so important. So that culture aspect, I think, was so critical to what you were saying. And so I'm glad you brought it up because that's really, really important. It would appear as though the folks, Guillermo, that you've worked with, the students you work with, do they feel supported? I mean, I would assume like they feel like you build that culture with them.
Well, I can say that from, I mean, it's funny because like when I experienced this in two ways because, you know, one, I work for a scholastic group, right? So I work for high school students. And then one, I work for an independent organization, which is, you know, Blue Coats, right? And it's funny because like drum corps is a whole different beast in terms of like the language that you can use, the amount of information that you can give, you know,
Right.
but you still have to have this kind of, you know, obviously respectful boundary.
Right.
But I'll tell you the honest truth. I don't really teach my Blue Coats students any different than I teach my Miamisburg students.
It's cool.
Quite simply, the difference for me when teaching is really the material,
Right.
you know, the choreography, the nuance, the stylistic choices, because I want my students to have this appreciation for what they're doing without having to worry about how they're being perceived. You know what I mean? I want them to have the ability to be able to explore what that means for them because sometimes when you have especially young performers, they're barely starting to figure out what that performance quality means for them, how they can unlock that for themselves. You know, from a high schooler's perspective, I mean, that's a scary thing, you know, especially for young women. You know, we live in a culture right now where like, you know, while women may be able to do quite a bit, I think that there's still a lot that women have to face on a day-to-day basis in terms of discrimination, in terms of harassment, in terms of a space where they feel like they can actually take on leadership roles. Like there's so much that women still also have to go through to be able to be respected, you know? And so for me as an instructor, being a male instructor, you know, I first of all can say that I've always had an admiration for strong women. I was raised by a single parent and an older sister who I also considered more of a mother than my sister. So I've always had those women as like a strong role model for me, and I based a lot of my my behaviors and a lot of my empathy, and I feel like I got a lot of my emotional intellect from strong women, you know. And so for me, when I teach my younger girls, like I try to make an open environment so that they understand that they're here to work together, collaboratively, together, that their voice matters, like how they feel matters. And I want them to feel empowered. Can I just say that like Scott Winters, man, you know Scott Winters, and you know that, you know, when you talk to Scott, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, right? He just makes it to where you just feel so comfortable.
Right.
He makes you feel like you're the most special person in the world. He makes you feel like you have something important to say and that you need to say it. And so, you know, when I first started working at Miamisburg, I modeled a lot of my teaching off of Scott, you know, specifically with those girls, because it was receptive to them, you know. And then as the seasons progressed, you know, I changed a couple things here and there, but the core element of being a figure for them that they can respect because I treated them with respect was always there. Those are my girls. Those are my girls that I'm raising, you know, in some way, you know, and teaching them to be young adults, to be responsible, to have self-discipline, to know that they can build confidence just by the hard work that they do, and that it can pay off. That they don't need all these other distractions in the world. All they need is their minds and their determination to make it happen. Because I always say to them, we can only do so much. We, the staff, we can choreograph whatever, we can do whatever, we can clean you till, we're blue in the face. But your work as a student really is what makes it happen, is really where the magic happens. But that also, it's kind of like a revolving thing. I think that also has to do with the fact that we teach our kids in that way.
Right.
So it is about the culture. It is about building a safe environment for your students to be around, because they will have so much more respect for you. And you will in turn also show them that you have respect for them, and it becomes a rapport. Like, that's the kind of rapport that I feel like as an educator, I want to have with my students, and it's funny because like I talked to like some of my alumni students that have graduated like maybe 2 years ago, will sometimes reach out to me and kind of talk and ask for advice. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of a beautiful thing that like they still feel, I only taught them for a couple seasons, but they feel so comfortable with me to be able to share certain things with me and to want to have advice and, look to me as an adult, to be able to tell them these things. And I'm honest with them. Sometimes I say, I don't have the answer, but let me tell you what I think about the situation. Or, this is what I went through, and it might not be quite the same, but I'm hoping that it kind of sheds some light as to maybe how this can be applicable to you, and that's part of being a good human being, I think. It's just caring for people, caring for your students. I mean,
here.
That's what it's about. It's not about the money.
Yeah.
It's not about the accolades. It's not about winning first place. It's not about getting a medal. John Vanderkoff, let me tell you, John Vanderkoff always says, it's not about the medal. I don't really care about the medal. I don't care about being first, second, third. He's like, I care about you having the best experience. John's always like, the third place, the second place, the first place, that's just all icing. But I want you to have the best experience. I want you to bring this to life the way that, you feel the best version of yourself being in this performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible. It
Cheers to that.
It completely changed my perception as an educator, but also as a performer.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Wise words.
Seriously. Yeah.
Seriously.
I've talked about it on this show before. I come from ignorance. I've had a lot to learn. And I mean, even in this conversation, I've learned a lot from having you here with us today. So thank you. Seriously. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being so open and sharing. This has been wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I think it's a good thing for us to have dialogue. I think the first steps to change is one, identifying certain issues, and then the next thing will be, after these discussions, what's the tangible? Thank you so much. I'm grateful for being a part of it.
Absolutely. For those of you watching, thank you for joining in, for listening. We'll be back with more. We've got a couple more of these in the works right now. But Guillermo, thanks to you again. And to the rest of you, have a great evening.